February 23, 1945. On Mount Shirbachi, Iwo Jima, Private First Class Tadashi Yamamoto huddled inside a concrete bunker, his hands shaking as he penned down thoughts that would cost him his life if discovered by his superiors. The Marines are not like ordinary humans. They do not perish easily. All we had been told about American troops being weak was false. Through the firing slit, he observed an event that challenged everything he had learned during training. 6 Marines charged his position despite intense machine gun fire. 3 of them were felled, but the others pressed on undeterred. When grenades rained down from his comrades' hands, 1 Marine took the blast for his squad and continued fighting even after sustaining devastating injuries until he could no longer grip his weapon. The remaining Marines seized control of the position within minutes. Iwo Jima was home to 21,000 Japanese defenders entrenched in an elaborate network of tunnels and fortifications stretching over 18 kilometers. They were led to believe they would face soft American troops who would collapse under pressure. What they encountered instead shattered every military assessment the Imperial Japanese Army had made about their adversaries. The consequences of this strategic error were not outlined in battle plans, but were vividly illustrated in the brutal close-quarter combat that left 26,000 Marines wounded or dead within just 36 days. The erosion of Japanese confidence began well before Iwo Jima on August 7, 1942, when Guadalcanal was invaded by American forces in the Solomon Islands. Corporal Hideo Takahashi, a veteran from the China campaign where Japanese troops had appeared invincible, jotted down his observations after 1 week of combat. The Americans who landed here are unlike any enemy we have encountered before. They refuse to retreat even when encircled and never surrender despite dire circumstances. Strangely, they seem invigorated by the night rather than intimidated by its darkness. The Battle of Guadalcanal marked Japan's inaugural defensive campaign in the Pacific, where the Imperial Japanese Army anticipated an effortless triumph over untested American troops. When the 1st Marine Division landed, it comprised slightly more than 16,000 soldiers. Although Japanese intelligence acknowledged the Marines as elite units, they also viewed them as Americans from a nation that prioritized personal comfort over collective duty. All these assumptions crumbled within days. Lieutenant Shigeru Fukudome led an augmented company tasked with reclaiming Henderson Field during the night of August 20th. His force consisted of about 200 men who had previously routed Chinese divisions 3 times their size, advancing in a flawless tactical formation and confident that American forces would be too scared to fight under cover of darkness. Instead, they encountered Marines stationed in meticulously prepared defensive positions with overlapping fields of fire. As Fukudome's unit advanced, it stumbled into an ambush area. The ensuing confrontation shattered Japanese strategic expectations. In defiance of their usual tactics, the Marines launched a counterattack directly into the night using automatic weapons with deadly accuracy. Lieutenant Fuku's diary, recovered after his death 3 days later, detailed his astonishment at what transpired. "They attacked us in the dark, when we thought it was our time to strike. The enemy moved silently through terrain considered impassable and killed Japanese soldiers without warning before disappearing into the shadows. By daybreak, only 90 men from Fukudome's company remained. American forces suffered 12 casualties. This pattern was repeated throughout Guadalcanal. Japanese troops, who were used to encountering enemies that would collapse under banzai charges, encountered Marines who held their ground until physically overrun and then engaged in hand-to-hand combat with bayonets, knives, and bare fists. Sergeant Kenji Matsumoto survived for 4 months on Guadalcanal before being evacuated. In a letter intercepted by American intelligence, he wrote, "We were taught that Americans are individualistic and would not sacrifice themselves for their comrades. This is incorrect. I witnessed a Marine machine gunner continue firing even after both legs had been shattered until Japanese infantry killed him at close range. His assistant immediately took over the weapon and continued to fire. We lost 40 men to this single position. The training that produced such soldiers bewildered Japanese military analysts. Private Yamamoto, who would later face Marines on Iwo Jima in 1943, first learned about them during intelligence briefings earlier that year. An instructor, a staff officer who had questioned captured Marines, seemed genuinely troubled by what he discovered. According to the briefing, American Marine training is so rigorous that it would be considered criminal abuse in any civilized army. It breaks down recruits mentally and physically before rebuilding them into something unrecognizable from their civilian selves. They are taught to view combat death as honorable and never to surrender, fighting until they are no longer capable of doing so. This sounds eerily familiar. Yes, the Americans have adopted our Bushido code, but added an element we did not anticipate: American industrial might. The combination proved devastating for Japanese forces, who fought with increasingly inferior equipment compared to their American counterparts. The training regimen for Marines was nearly identical in intensity to that of Japanese soldiers, producing fighters equally ready to face death head-on. However, unlike their adversaries, the Marines were equipped with an overwhelming arsenal of firepower, rendering the enemy's defensive positions unsustainable. On November 20, 1943, Rear Admiral K. Shibasaki led a force of 500 Japanese defenders on Tarawa Atoll, confident in the impregnability of his fortifications. Yet this belief was shattered within just 76 hours by the 2nd Marine Division. Amongst the few survivors was Private First Class Tadashi Ogawa, who recounted to interrogators what he had witnessed. The first wave suffered a devastating massacre while still in the water. We mowed down hundreds of them. Additional landing craft soon followed. The second wave perished as they struggled onto the beach. More troops kept arriving. By the time the third wave reached our entrenched positions with flamethrowers, it was clear that neither side would relent until all were dead. The casualty figures were staggering. Nearly 400 men lost their lives on Tarawa within those 3 days of relentless combat. The surviving Marines demonstrated their unwavering determination to seize any objective at whatever cost. Documents seized from Saipan in 1944 revealed that Japanese intelligence reports characterized the Marines as shock troops with a fanatical dedication to their objectives, noting that they refused orders to retreat and would counterattack even when tactically unfavorable. The enemy also observed that casualties inflicted upon Marine units did not diminish effectiveness until total annihilation occurred. This classification arose from a thorough analysis. Captain Yoshio Kobayashi, who endured the Guadalcanal campaign, offered meticulous comparisons. American Army infantry tactics are well established and conventional in nature. In contrast, the Marines operate quite differently. They move forward aggressively without regard for casualties. This acceptance of high casualty rates is unparalleled. The rapid pace of Marine operations proved just as destructive as their firepower. Lieutenant Colonel Kunio Nakagawa, who commanded forces on Peleliu Island, based his defensive plans on past campaigns where American forces typically paused after landings. However, the Marines never hesitated. They landed at Zoetri 30 on September 15th and controlled half of the airfield by nightfall. In his diary, Nakagawa documented his shock. "My defense crumbled because I assumed the enemy would behave rationally. The Marines do not act rationally. They move with total commitment regardless of the situation." This level of dedication manifested in actions that seemed suicidal to Japanese observers, but proved devastatingly effective. Sergeant Kenji Matsumoto, captured on Bougainville, recounted watching a Marine platoon assault a fortified hilltop position. They approached over open ground exposed to machine gun fire from 3 bunkers. According to Japanese doctrine, this would have required extensive artillery preparation followed by an infantry attack under smoke cover. The Marine lieutenant assessed the situation for approximately 30 seconds before ordering the assault without any prior preparations. The platoon rushed straight into the intense fire. Within the first 20 seconds, 7 soldiers were down. Those who made it to the first bunker managed to destroy it using grenades and explosives. 3 more men fell while assaulting the second bunker. The remaining Marines then took control of it. The last 5 men captured the third bunker. Of the initial 37 men, the platoon suffered 12 casualties in their assault on what was thought to be an impregnable position. From order to completion, this entire operation lasted only 4 minutes. This wasn't about courage, it was a methodical acceptance of losses to achieve objectives more swiftly than could be anticipated. The concept of acceptable casualties was utterly alien to Japanese officers who were trained to prioritize the lives of their soldiers in pursuit of strategic goals. In contrast, Marines viewed casualties as an inevitable cost of victory and paid that price without hesitation when necessary. This approach created a psychological edge beyond mere numerical superiority. Faced with the knowledge that Marines would endure up to 50% losses to capture a position, Japanese commanders were forced into impossible choices. Defend inadequately and risk losing the position, defend adequately but weaken other fronts, or abandon it altogether and relinquish control of strategic terrain. Every decision led to defeat, differing only in timing. Major Yoshi Takahori, who survived as a senior staff officer on Ima, later analyzed this tactical dilemma during post-war interrogations. General Kuribayashi recognized that halting the Marine advance was impossible. Our defensive strategies were crafted to hinder their progress while causing as many casualties as possible. We achieved this goal with remarkable effectiveness, inflicting over 20,000 casualties on the Marines within a period of 36 days. Such heavy losses would typically cripple any other military force's offensive capabilities. Despite these significant losses, the Marine reinforcements arrived without any diminishment in their assault intensity. Our strategic objective was to inflict around 10,000 casualties, which we anticipated would stall further advances for at least a week. However, the Marines suffered this number of casualties within just 1 week and maintained their relentless momentum. This stark reality underscored our inherent disadvantage. The Marines could replenish their losses much faster than we could reinforce. With 50 Marine divisions deployed across the Pacific Theater or undergoing training in the United States compared to our limited defending forces on each island, the odds were overwhelmingly against us. It was a matter of simple mathematics that would lead to our inevitable defeat. Beyond mere manpower figures, it became evident that the Marines had substantial logistical support, allowing them sustained operations at levels that Japanese forces could not sustain. Lieutenant Toshio Yamamoto, captured during the Battle of Saipan, observed this disparity firsthand during an infiltration mission shortly after the initial landing. Leading a patrol 3 days post-invasion, we anticipated encountering battle-weary troops with meager supplies, conditions typical for Japanese soldiers after such intense combat on a contested beachhead. Instead, we discovered well-fed Marines receiving fresh ammunition via truck convoys and medical aid tents treating wounded personnel, while rotation areas allowed units to rest. Their supply caches were stocked with more ammunition than an entire regiment of our forces possessed, highlighting the vast logistical superiority that enabled the relentless advance of American troops. They utilized mobile kitchens to prepare fresh meals and had portable showers along with laundry facilities. Despite being engaged in one of the most intense battles of the Pacific War, their living conditions were superior to what we experienced during peacetime garrison duty. This showcased that defeating them was unfeasible. They never faced a shortage of food, ammunition, medical supplies, or reinforcements, whereas we did. The constant supply lines established by the Americans created a form of attrition warfare that favored the Marines despite higher initial casualties. Japanese defenders fought from fixed positions with limited resources and no possibility of reinforcement. Each casualty was permanent, and every bullet fired could not be replaced. In contrast, Marines operated from an expanding beachhead, receiving daily supplies via ship and air transport. Casualties were evacuated and replaced promptly, while ammunition seemed limitless. As the battle dragged on, Japanese defenders weakened progressively, while the strength of the Marines increased. This dynamic proved critical during the Battle of Peleliu, where Kono Nakagawa's defense held out from September 15th to November 27th. The 1st Marine Division suffered such heavy casualties that it was withdrawn and replaced by elements of the 8A 1st Infantry Division in October. A 2nd Marine Division continued operations until Army units relieved them. What Japanese planners anticipated as a 1-week battle stretched into an 11-week conflict. Despite inflicting over 10,000 American casualties, Japan could not sustain such losses and continue defending every island at this expense. The arithmetic was untenable, and by mid-1944, it became evident to Japanese military leaders. Intelligence reports circulated among garrison commanders acknowledged the inevitability of Marine advances, despite any resistance. A captured document on Tinian offered guidance that underscored a total lack of hope for victory. In defending against Marine assaults, the aim was not to hold positions indefinitely, but rather to delay their advance long enough to support broader strategic goals. Each day of resistance and each Marine casualty had significant value. However, it was also made clear that defensive positions would eventually fall. Preparations should include stockpiling ammunition, establishing multiple layers of defenses, and planning for staged retreats. Defenders were advised to prepare for the possibility of dying in defense of their posts, as this sacrifice would buy crucial time for the empire. This honor was recognized even in the absence of victory. This grim assessment shaped Japanese defensive tactics for the remainder of the Pacific War. Instead of striving to win battles, defenders aimed to make these engagements so costly that the United States might seek negotiations rather than a direct invasion of Japan. The Marine Corps persisted through casualty levels that would have compelled other forces to retreat, thereby neutralizing this tactic. Despite incurring significant losses, they pressed onward without hesitation. Nothing could deter them. Neither expense nor fortified defenses held sway. Their offensive drive never ceased. Private Tadashi Gowa, one of the few survivors from Tarawa, later recounted the profound psychological impact of confronting such relentless adversaries. By day's end on the first day of combat, it was clear that our forces were destined to suffer defeat. The Marines had landed in overwhelming numbers, supported by naval bombardment that obliterated our defensive positions and relentless airstrikes that pounded us relentlessly. Despite these adversities, we harbored hope that inflicting substantial casualties would dissuade further invasions. However, as the days unfolded, it became evident that this strategy was futile when faced with an enemy who continued their assault regardless of staggering losses. Marines marched straight into machine gun fire that decimated many ranks, only to be replaced by yet another wave. This cycle repeated relentlessly. For 3 days, we engaged in fierce combat with unwavering resolve. We inflicted thousands of casualties upon the advancing forces, but our own losses were catastrophic. Nearly every soldier fell save for a few survivors. The Marines achieved their objective on schedule and proceeded to advance further across the Pacific, proving that no price was too great to pay for victory. It became clear at that point that our cause was doomed. An adversary willing to pay any cost to secure victory cannot be deterred by raising the stakes of success. This grim understanding permeated through the Japanese military as returning soldiers from one conflict shared their harrowing experiences with those preparing for another. By February 1945, when U.S. Marines landed on Iwo Jima, every defender was acutely aware that they were facing an implacable foe in the Pacific theater. They recognized that death awaited them, and they knew the island would eventually fall to the Marines. The sole uncertainty lay in how many American lives would be sacrificed alongside their own. General Kuribayashi's defensive strategy acknowledged these harsh realities and crafted plans around them. He instructed his troops with candor about what official propaganda refused to admit: victory was unattainable, but resistance could exact a heavy toll on the enemy. The mission of every soldier was clear: accept death and inflict casualties, thereby delaying the American advance. This was their duty to the Empire during its darkest moments. This approach proved accurate in numerous battles, with February 19, 1945, D-Day for Iwo Jima serving as a testament to Kurabayashi's meticulous analysis of marine capabilities. General Tadamichi Kurabayashi, possibly Japan's most adept defensive commander in the Pacific, dedicated months to studying marine tactics and developing defenses specifically tailored to counteract them. His preparations were nothing short of extraordinary. Prior to putting Kurabayashi's theories to the test, Marine raiders had showcased abilities surpassing conventional standards. These elite units executed deep penetration missions that instilled fear far greater than their limited numbers would suggest. Japanese troops soon realized that these raiders operated effectively under cover of darkness. Colonel Kano Aichiki encountered this truth tragically on Guadalcanal in August 1942. His 900-man force had previously outmaneuvered Chinese opponents through relentless nighttime assaults. According to Japanese military doctrine, Americans were believed to fear the dark. Ichi planned a conventional night attack against Marine positions along the Tarawa River. Raiders from the 1st Marine Raider Battalion lay in wait in prepared defensive positions. Ichiki's troops entered the river at 1:30 a.m. on August 21st. The raiders unleashed devastating firepower, including automatic weapons and pre-registered artillery fire, within moments of the Japanese forces wading into the water. The engagement concluded after only 20 minutes, with over 700 Japanese casualties and just 35 Marine losses. Although the raider units were officially disbanded and absorbed into regular Marine divisions by 1944, their tactical innovations permeated throughout the core infantry units. By then, standard Marine infantry adopted techniques originally pioneered by raiders. Continuous night patrols became routine, with small unit leadership empowered to make independent decisions. Enhanced communication systems facilitated an unprecedented level of coordination among forces. This led to a formidable enemy capable of sustained combat around the clock, exerting pressure that Japanese troops found challenging to match. Corporal Hideo Takahashi, who fought in 3 different islands before being captured on Okinawa, succinctly encapsulated this experience. The Marines never halted their relentless assault. They conducted daytime attacks with overwhelming firepower and nighttime infiltrations by small units into our defenses. Continuous artillery barrages prevented any rest, and airstrikes occurred throughout daylight hours. From the moment of landing until our ultimate defeat, we were under constant pressure without respite. Historically, Japanese forces had an advantage at night, allowing them to rest and regroup after daytime battles. However, against the Marines, there was no such break. Every hour was a time of potential combat until death or capture. This was industrial warfare applied with ruthless efficiency. The systematic approach of Marine operations both intrigued and terrified Japanese military analysts. Unlike their own forces, which relied on courage and individual sacrifice to compensate for material limitations, the Marines employed methodical, maximum force solutions to any challenge. When confronted with a fortified position, they did not depend solely on bravery or tactical ingenuity. Instead, they identified targets, called in artillery fire that unleashed hundreds of shells to destroy them, followed by tanks equipped with flamethrowers to eliminate any remaining defenders. Infantry would then secure the area. If resistance persisted, naval gunfire from warships obliterated everything within range. This methodical destruction was chillingly effective. Lieutenant Saburo Endo, an artillery forwarder on Saipan, documented these tactics in detail during his June 1944 diary entries. He observed that Marines landed under the continuous fire support of warships for 3 hours prior to hitting the beach. Aircraft had already bombarded our positions for 2 hours before the initial landing commenced. When Marines landed, each of their movements was backed up by tanks, artillery, naval bombardments, and aerial attacks. They proceeded cautiously and methodically, obliterating everything they encountered along the way. Whenever we managed to stop them at fortified positions, they summoned battleship fire that practically obliterated entire hills from existence. Rather than attempting to breach our defenses through bravery or tactical ingenuity, they relied on overwhelming force to dismantle those positions before advancing further. This was not warfare as we knew it. Instead, it resembled systematic industrial annihilation aimed at eradicating any form of resistance. We engaged with rifles and light machine guns, whereas the Marines had access to an entire nation's resources. Endo's insights reflected what many Japanese soldiers came to realize too late. The Pacific War was not a contest of warrior spirit or tactical prowess, but a competition between Japan's limited industrial capabilities and America's vast production capacity. As part of this massive production force, the Marines were equipped with advanced weaponry and training designed to exploit American advantages relentlessly while accepting significant casualties that would be offset by an endless supply of reinforcements. In such confrontations, Japanese bravery and tactical skill proved insufficient against such overwhelming firepower. The outcome was predetermined from the outset, leaving only the duration and cost as variables. Kuribayashi prohibited the futile banzai charges seen in earlier battles and instead developed a layered defense system that funneled Marines into kill zones protected by multiple bunkers. He also positioned artillery to unleash devastating barrages on landing beaches, aiming to neutralize enemy forces before they could establish themselves ashore. He constructed 11 miles of tunnels linking up with 1,500 cave positions, each meticulously documented for mortar and artillery strikes. The beach was a perilous trap. On February 19th, 3 Marine divisions totaling 70,000 men landed at Wima. Kuribayashi's defense system functioned precisely as intended. Naval shelling inflicted minimal damage to the fortifications. Marines disembarked in organized waves but suffered devastating losses almost immediately. Within minutes, the black volcanic sand was littered with fallen comrades and wounded soldiers. Japanese artillery spotters coordinated their fire with pinpoint accuracy. It appeared the assault was faltering. However, an unexpected turn of events occurred that Kuribayashi did not foresee, although he should have anticipated it based on past battles. The Marines refused to retreat for regrouping. Instead, they pressed forward into the artillery barrage. They identified weaknesses in the Japanese defenses and capitalized on them. When bunkers halted their advance, demolition squads pushed through heavy enemy fire to neutralize them. Even as these teams were decimated, replacements moved in to continue the assault without pause. The offensive never ceased. Private First Class Tadashi Yamamoto documented from his bunker position how Marine flamethrower units approached his own fortification, leaving him bewildered and astonished. We eliminated the operator, and his assistant grabbed the weapon and continued fighting. We then killed him as well. A third Marine took over with the weapon but was severely wounded in the process. Despite his injuries, he kept firing until the ammunition ran out and then hurled grenades into the firing ports before we could stop him. This went on until demolition engineers arrived at the bunker entrance and neutralized it. The position had fallen by that point. This sequence of events repeated itself more than 30 times within the first hour. How do you overcome enemies who refuse to yield? The Japanese defenders found out there was no way to do so. The harsh reality of Yoima showcased Marine doctrine at its most extreme. A total of 70,000 landed on the island, 26,000 became casualties, including nearly 7,000 killed in action. However, every single one of the 21,000 Japanese defenders perished except for 1,006 who were captured, mostly due to unconsciousness or severe injuries rendering them incapable of resistance. The Marines endured an almost unimaginable toll but managed to seize all their objectives. Kuribayashi, who survived until late March 1945, communicated his final assessment in a message sent to Tokyo before the position fell. He stated that the Marines are among the most formidable fighting forces he has encountered. Their attributes include rigorous training that produces soldiers willing to endure casualties far beyond what other units could sustain. Secondly, their weaponry outmatches ours by a ratio of 5:1 for artillery and an even more significant disparity of 10:1 in air support. Thirdly, their junior leaders make tactical decisions at squad level, whereas our officers typically handle such matters at the company level, allowing them to seize opportunities faster than we can respond. Fourthly, and most critically, they never cease their attacks. No defensive strategy can indefinitely withstand this relentless assault. This unyielding offensive approach instilled fear in Japanese defenders throughout the Pacific theater. Soldiers could cope with defeat on the battlefield or being outgunned or outmaneuvered. However, an enemy that continued to attack regardless of losses was incomprehensible. Corporal Hideo Takahashi, who fought on 3 islands before his capture during the Okinawa campaign, described this phenomenon in a post-war interview. It's essential to grasp the distinction between Marines and other American forces. Army units would advance, sustain casualties, and then withdraw to regroup. This is standard military practice. In contrast, Marine units would press on even after suffering losses, continuing their assault over the bodies of fallen comrades. This approach isn't military doctrine, it's something entirely different. What made Marines so formidable was deliberate training that broke recruits down mentally and physically before rebuilding them into warriors whose identity was indistinguishable from their unit. Interrogation reports captured and detailed how a Marine prisoner explained this transformation to bewildered Japanese coffers in Japanese intelligence officers. Recruit training lasts 8 weeks. During the first 4 weeks, drill instructors break down all civilian traits of the recruits. They are told they have no value, that they will never become Marines, and that quitting and joining the army is their best option. The conditioning is both psychological and physical. You are pushed beyond your limits until you believe you can't go on anymore, and then even further. Those who give up face public humiliation. Those who endure learn that surrender is not an option. The Japanese officer's reaction was recorded in the interrogation report. This bears some resemblance to our own training methods, but is far more methodical. However, the Marine prisoner recounted something entirely unprecedented within Japanese military training. Over the next 4 weeks, instructors mold you into a true Marine. You come to understand that you are part of something larger than yourself, and that every Marine who has ever lived is your brother. This experience creates a unique bond among Marines. They fight not just for themselves, but to honor all Marines past and present. The psychological pressures forge fighters willing to advance, even when rational thought suggests otherwise. During the Battle of Saipan on October 24-25, 1944, Colonel Takuya Tokosha led around 3,000 Japanese soldiers in a desperate banzai charge against Marines stationed there. According to Japanese military doctrine, such an assault, executed with absolute commitment, would overwhelm any opposition through sheer force and fear of being overrun. When the attack commenced at 300 hours, most of the Marines from the 27th Infantry Division were sleeping. The Japanese soldiers surged into the Marine positions, screaming and charging forward with bayonets fixed. Despite this overwhelming assault, traditional military doctrine would have called for a tactical retreat to regroup and reassess the situation. The Marines swiftly launched a counterattack. Officers and non-commissioned officers coordinated frantic defensive maneuvers at crucial points. Every available weapon was put into use. From artillery firing at extremely close range to trench knives during brutal hand-to-hand combat, the intense fighting lasted 4 hours. By dawn, the battlefield was strewn with Japanese bodies over an area 500 meters deep. American casualties amounted to 90 killed and 247 wounded, while approximately 3,000 Japanese soldiers perished. Private First Class Tishi Yoshida survived the charge but sustained severe injuries. His debriefing report, filed 3 days later, documented the shock felt by his comrades. We had been told that Americans fear close combat and rely solely on firepower due to their cowardice. However, when we charged into their positions, expecting them to break, they fought back fiercely with bayonets and pistols in hand-to-hand combat, ultimately defeating us. This was not an act of cowardice. Instead, our troops had been deceived by false narratives. Propaganda depicted Americans as soft individuals who could not endure hardship. Yet Marines endured weeks, sleeping in water-filled foxholes, eating cold rations, and fighting under extreme heat and humidity conditions, defying these claims. Japanese soldiers, accustomed to rigorous training for endurance, witnessed the resilience of Marines thriving in environments that pushed their own limits to the utmost extent. Corporal Kenji Matsumoto, who had previously survived the Battle of Guadalcanal before being transferred to Bougainville, where he was captured in February 1944, described the stark contrast in conditions and capabilities between the two forces. By September 1942, our rations had been drastically reduced to 2 meals of rice daily, and sometimes even less than that. We supplemented our diet with anything edible found in the jungle. Watching the Marines eat 3 full meals a day, and at times more, was both frustrating and humbling. They received regular resupply by air and sea, ensuring an endless supply of fresh water, medical supplies, and ammunition. It became clear to us that we were up against an enemy with seemingly inexhaustible resources, which was a demoralizing realization. The overwhelming material superiority enjoyed by the Marines had a devastating impact on our morale and combat effectiveness. When faced with fortified bunkers, they employed coordinated tactics involving artillery barrages that unleashed hundreds of shells in mere minutes, Sherman tanks equipped with flamethrowers, and naval gunfire capable of flattening entire hillsides. If these methods failed to dislodge us from entrenched positions, demolition teams would bring forward hundreds of pounds of explosives. Before his death at Guadalcanal, Lieutenant Chijuru Fuku compiled the most comprehensive analysis of Marine combined arms tactics captured during the war. The Marines fought not as individual soldiers, but as integrated units working in perfect synchronicity. Riflemen secured our defensive positions while machine gunners provided suppressive fire. Mortar teams laid down smoke screens to obscure our observers, artillery destroyed bunkers, and tanks advanced alongside infantry. Aircraft would bomb any targets that were out of range for artillery. All this was coordinated swiftly by junior officers using radios, a level of organization we could not match. Our inability to respond effectively stems from our slower coordination process. By the time our commander comprehends the situation and disseminates instructions, the Marines have already capitalized on our vulnerabilities. This rapid execution was made possible by the delegation of authority down to the lowest levels within their ranks. Sergeants were empowered to make decisions typically reserved for captains in Japanese military doctrine, while corporals led assaults that required a lieutenant's authorization in the Imperial Army. Consequently, this enemy adapted more swiftly than we could react. When a bunker halted a Marine advance, a sergeant would quickly order the attack's direction and call for supporting fire without waiting for higher-level orders. As a result, Japanese defenders frequently found themselves engaged with enemies who appeared from unexpected angles, as Marines had identified and exploited weaknesses before our commanders even became aware of them. The most dreaded weapon wielded by Marines was not their rifles or artillery, it was the flamethrower. Japanese soldiers trained to meet death honorably in combat discovered that a flamethrower offered no such glorious end. Corporal Hideo Takahashi, captured on Okinawa with burns covering 40% of his body, described the psychological impact. We were taught to embrace death as an honorable fate during battle. Whether from bullets, bayonets, or artillery, these are deaths befitting warriors. But fire is different. You see flames advancing toward your position, you smell burning comrades, and you hear their screams. There is no honor in this kind of demise. This is mechanized carnage. What the Marines grasped was beyond our comprehension. Contemporary warfare has no room for romantic notions of valor. It revolves around efficiently eliminating the adversary with cutting-edge technology and tactics. For many Japanese defenders, this understanding arrived too late. By 1944, every soldier stationed in the Pacific recognized that confronting Marines meant dealing with an unparalleled blend of superior training, weaponry, and doctrine. Intelligence briefings disseminated to garrison units portrayed the Marines with a mix of awe and fear verging on supernatural dread. A document seized on Tinian Island in July 1944 offered meticulous advice on countering Marine attacks. This report acknowledged several realities that contradicted long-standing Japanese propaganda. Firstly, Marines are typically larger and more robust than their Japanese counterparts due to better nutrition from a young age. Secondly, they receive superior ammunition supplies, equipment, and weapons compared to Imperial Japanese Army troops. Thirdly, Marine training places an unmatched emphasis on marksmanship skills, enabling the average Marine rifleman to hit targets at ranges where our soldiers struggle. Moreover, Marines benefit from air and naval support that we cannot compete with or counteract. Perhaps most crucially, Marines are indoctrinated with the belief that surrender is unacceptable. They will fight until death or achieve victory without considering any other outcome. The report then proceeded to offer tactical guidance, revealing how Japanese confidence had eroded significantly in the face of these formidable opponents. It warned not to anticipate retreats from Marine forces and cautioned against assuming casualties would diminish their morale. Avoid assuming that numerical superiority guarantees an advantage, as their superior firepower diminishes this benefit. Do not resort to banzai charges unless absolutely necessary, since Marines will mow down charging troops with automatic weapons and artillery fire. Marines do not fear night attacks, they are just as effective in the dark. The sole viable defense is a series of well-prepared positions that interlock fields of fire and have multiple fallback options in place to be utilized as needed. The objective is not to prevent the Marines from advancing, but to inflict as many casualties as possible before the position succumbs. This defensive approach recognizes harsh realities yet offers no path to ultimate victory. General Tatsumichi Korebayashi, who was tasked with fortifying Iwo Jima in early 1945, understood these principles fully. In January of that year, 1 month prior to the invasion, he wrote a letter to his wife, "I am ordered to defend Iwo against American Marines. This is an insoluble problem with only one solution. The Americans will land with 70,000 troops and will have total control over the sea and air. They will supply themselves endlessly and persist until Iwo Jima falls. My objective is not to defeat them, that is impossible. Instead, my goal is to make them pay a devastating price so that the United States may reconsider an invasion of the home islands. Each day I prolong their fight gives Japan more time to prepare. Every Marine life lost reduces the enemy's strength in the final battle." Korebayashi's strategy mirrored the shift in Japanese defensive doctrine from confident aggression to grim, attrition-focused tactics. On February 19th, the Marines who landed on Iwo Jima encountered defensive positions that were intended to drain their strength rather than outright repel them. Each bunker required a direct assault, and every cave entrance was guarded by several firing points. Every inch of terrain came at a heavy price in terms of lives lost. However, this tactic backfired because it did not account for the resilience of Marine culture. Despite suffering severe casualties, their morale remained unshaken. Instead, it hardened further with each loss. The death of every comrade fueled an even greater desire for vengeance among those who survived, intensifying their determination to prevail. As the fighting grew more intense and brutal, the Marines fought harder than ever before. This behavior was beyond the understanding of Japanese military strategists, who believed that even the most fanatical troops had a breaking point. Private First Class Tadashi Yamamoto, one of the few survivors until his death on March 10th in his bunker, recorded his final thoughts the night prior. "Tomorrow," he wrote, "the Marines will reach our current position. Over the past 3 weeks, we have inflicted heavy casualties on them, and reinforcements continue to arrive daily. Yet they do not show any signs of weakening or slowing down. They persist relentlessly. I once thought that our indomitable spirit would outmatch American material resources. Clearly, I was mistaken. The Marines possess both intangible spirit and tangible resources. They combine unwavering courage with weapons and supplies that surpass our capabilities. We aspire to be like them, while they embody everything we claim ourselves to be. This is the reality we face as we approach death. On the following morning, a demolition team from the Marine Corps obliterated his bunker after an intense 6-hour battle during which all 11 defenders were killed and 3 Marines sustained injuries. The defense delayed the Marines' progress by precisely 40 minutes before being outflanked by other units that advanced while combat engineers dismantled the bunker. This scenario played out repeatedly throughout Iwo Jima. Japanese soldiers fought with extraordinary bravery, inflicting severe losses but accomplishing little more than their own demise. The campaign concluded on March 26th. Final statistics revealed the extent of the struggle when Marines encountered Japan's most formidable defenses. 21,000 Japanese defenders perished, while only 1,600 surrendered, primarily due to unconsciousness or physical incapacity. Marines suffered a staggering 26,000 casualties out of an initial commitment of 70,000 troops, amounting to nearly 40% casualty rates. Any other military force would have required months to recuperate. Yet the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Marine Divisions were back in action within just 6 weeks. Their capacity to endure such losses while continuing to fight became their most distinctive trait, instilling fear into Japanese defenders. Corporal Kenji Matsumoto, imprisoned in Hawaii following his capture, described during a 1946 interview the feelings of Japanese soldiers facing Marines. The worst part was comprehending that no matter how many casualties they inflicted on Marine units, the remaining fighters would continue their relentless assault. Injuries to their leaders could be inflicted, but sergeants would then take over command. You could exhaust them through relentless combat, yet they would persist the following day. Victory seemed impossible. You merely managed to eliminate them until your own demise was inevitable. This was not warfare, it was mutual destruction. Moreover, the Marines had a numerical advantage over us. American industrial might churn out an endless supply of replacement Marines, which astounded Japanese strategists. By late 1944, intelligence indicated that Marine divisions endured a staggering 75% casualty rate in September, but reached full strength once more within 3 months. These fresh replacements fought with the same proficiency as seasoned veterans on Iwo Jima Island in February. The capacity to replenish and rejuvenate depleted units was beyond Japan's reach. Unlike their counterparts, the Imperial Japanese Army lacked an effective training regimen or a system to maintain unit integrity while absorbing massive losses. American logistical prowess permeated all facets of Marine operations. Medics tended wounded Marines within minutes of injury. Rapid evacuation by air and sea ensured that casualties were swiftly transported from the battlefield to hospital ships in mere hours. Blood plasma, antibiotics, and advanced surgical care saved lives at unprecedented rates during military history. Conversely, Japanese soldiers often perished due to insufficient medical supplies, infections, or injuries that American medical practices routinely treated successfully. Even after Japan's surrender in August 1945, captured soldiers witnessed Marines recovering from wounds that would have been fatal for their own troops and returning to combat readiness. The ultimate indignity came when Marine forces occupied the Japanese home islands, anticipating resistance from a populace conditioned to embrace death rather than capitulation. Contrary to expectations, they discovered a wary populace relieved that the conflict had come to end. Private First Class Tishi Yoshida, who was repatriated in December 1946 after recovering from injuries sustained on Saipan, shared his experience upon returning home. He stated unequivocally, "Everything we were told turned out to be false." The Marines did not mistreat prisoners. Instead, they provided food, medical care, and shelter. In many ways, the treatment by American forces was better than what we received from our own officers. We realized that it wasn't the Americans who were barbaric. It was us. This realization shattered whatever trust remained in the empire. Thousands of former Japanese soldiers reached similar conclusions. Post-war interrogation reports highlighted recurring themes: admiration for the combat prowess of Marine units, anger at the Japanese leadership for misleading them about American military capabilities, and a widespread acknowledgement that the war had been futile from its inception due to Japan's inability to compete with America's industrial output or match the quality of soldiers like the Marines. The most comprehensive evaluation came in General Tadamichi Kurebayashi's final message sent via Desper radio transmission on March 21st, just 5 days before Iwo Jima fell. In his note, he wrote, "I have engaged the Marines for 31 days. They are the finest soldiers I've encountered. Their training is superior, their equipment unparalleled, and their courage matches our own. Moreover, the numbers seem limitless. Japan stands no chance against such formidable adversaries. All we can do is engage them bravely and hope that our sacrifices will buy enough time for peace negotiations to save whatever remains of our country. To my fellow officers who are readying defenses on the home islands, understand this: the Marines will arrive and you cannot prevent their advance. What you can do is ensure that they suffer heavy losses for every inch of land they capture. If the cost becomes too steep, perhaps it might compel them to negotiate rather than annihilate everything in their path. That is our sole hope, but it vanished with the atomic bombs dropped in August." Kurebayashi's evaluation of the Marines was spot on. They were the spearhead that shattered Japanese defensive lines throughout the Pacific. Their casualties were staggering, yet they persevered without flinching or retreating from any objective. They exemplified the invincible warriors portrayed by Japanese propaganda as epitomizing the Imperial Japanese Army's valor and steadfastness. The ultimate irony lies in the fact that while Marines displayed these qualities through rigorous training and unparalleled logistical support, rather than relying on mystical warrior spirits or racial superiority, they demonstrated that modern warfare demands both bravery and industrial might. It requires a blend of thorough preparation, technological advancements, individual sacrifice, and robust national resources. Japan possessed courage and discipline, whereas America had all these elements combined. In this context, the Marines epitomized this comprehensive approach more effectively than any other American unit. Japanese veterans acknowledged this difference. In 1975, when Corporal Hideo Takahashi was an elderly man, he reflected on what his generation learned from battling the Marines. He explained that they were indoctrinated to believe that sheer willpower triumphed over material assets. However, the adversaries demonstrated that a combination of spirit and resources was truly decisive. The Marines possessed the same willingness to sacrifice as their Japanese counterparts, but also had access to Sherman tanks, naval artillery support, an endless supply of ammunition, air superiority, medical care, and abundant provisions. Conversely, they were armed with rifles and fueled by promises of victory, which proved insufficient in every engagement. The numerical evidence corroborates this assessment. Marines participated in every significant Pacific campaign from Guadalcanal in August 1942 to Okinawa in June 1945, sustaining approximately 86,000 casualties, including nearly 19,500 fatalities. Despite these losses, they never failed to capture their objectives, held on to ground once seized, and consistently demonstrated that superior tactics or fighting spirit alone could not defeat them. The cost was indeed high, but the outcomes were unambiguous. Japanese military experts who examined Marine operations after the war reached a collective consensus. The Marines epitomized American military might by merging a warrior ethos akin to Japanese Bushido with industrial resources comparable to America's production capabilities. They nurtured soldiers prepared to die for victory while ensuring those soldiers had the weapons and support necessary to achieve it. This formidable alliance proved unstoppable. Lessons were painfully acquired too late for the 21,000 Japanese troops who battled against U.S. Marines on Iwo Jima and the 30,000 who fought them in Okinawa, as well as the countless others preparing to engage them on the home islands before the war's end through surrender. These soldiers were acutely aware that the Marines represented their most dreaded adversary, a force deemed unstoppable by their superiors, one that relentlessly pressed forward despite mounting casualties until all Japanese defenders lay defeated. Private First Class Tadashi Yamamoto penned his final entry in a bunker on Iwo Jima just hours before his demise. In it he wrote, "The Marines will triumph not due to greater courage or a stronger desire for victory than ours. Rather, they will succeed because the nation equips them with everything needed for success and employs these resources mercilessly until we are all fallen." This sentiment encapsulates the truth that our leaders should have conveyed. We were samurai armed with swords confronting men equipped with machine guns, but also possessing the spirit of samurai. Survival was never an option, only death awaited us. The following day, when the Marines overtook his bunker, they discovered Yamamoto's diary and submitted it to intelligence officers for translation and archiving among thousands of similar documents. These writings captured the reality that Japanese soldiers across the Pacific had come to understand through excruciating first-hand experience. Engaging the Marines was unlike battling any other American or Allied forces. It was clashing with an opponent who united Japan's purported strengths with its inherent weaknesses, rendering them the most formidable enemy Japanese troops would ever encounter. The statistics provide one perspective, while the battles reveal a deeper narrative. The testimonies of surviving Japanese soldiers paint a comprehensive picture. They faced adversaries who refused to yield, would rather die than capitulate, and possessed the weaponry and resources necessary to make their resolve lethal. Against such relentless opponents, bravery alone was insufficient. Merely possessing training or sheer determination was not enough either. Only surrender or death remained as viable options. The Japanese military opted for death, while the Marines carried out this grim task with methodical precision. This is why Japanese troops dreaded engaging the Marines more than any other force. When the Marines declared they would achieve their objectives and paid whatever price necessary to do so, they always followed through without hesitation. Japanese defenders realized that courage was meaningless against an enemy whose resolve matched theirs but whose firepower outmatched them significantly, rendering resistance futile. This harsh reality was revealed in bloodshed from Guadalcanal to Okinawa. Once the war concluded and propaganda faded away, Japanese veterans admitted the truth their leaders had concealed during wartime. The Marines embodied everything Japan aspired its soldiers to be, yet fell short of providing the necessary support and resources. Facing such an adversary made the conflict unwinnable from the outset. Through a series of island battles, the Marines demonstrated this point unequivocally at great cost to both sides in terms of thousands of lives lost.